Hello and welcome to the Sound of Listening. Today I'm here with Robert and we are going to be discussing some things around artificial intelligence. He and I co-wrote a post a few months ago regarding AI and the concept of the subconscious and whether AI has like its own subconscious or whether that could be argued. And we're going to talk about that and just other things as they come up.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Thank you for having me. Or, whatever things that people say whenever they're invited on podcasts and all that stuff. Um, yeah, I think it's still a topic that is very much on people's minds these days because we keep seeing a lot of stuff about how AI this and AI that, and we've had a couple of notable CEOs recently say, we're just not hiring engineers anymore. And that is new, but we've heard that about designers, we've heard that about product people, we've heard that about sales, we've heard that about marketing, we've heard that about lots of other jobs before. So it's kind of only inevitable that they come for developers as well. And I think a lot of what we are finding, though, especially after the last year and a half of seeing this, is that a lot of it is still hype. And it's really hard to tell how much is hype and how much is reality. I'll stop monologuing in a minute. There was a pretty interesting demo that was given by a company. They come up with this AI helper called Devin. And Devin was basically, they said is like, imagine that you as a senior engineer have a junior engineer next to you helping you out. That's Devin. That's what Devin is there for. And when you saw the demo, Devin looked pretty impressive. It was doing a bunch of really not super complicated tasks, but things that you would assign a junior programmer. Like if I had a junior engineer sitting right next to me just looking at me for work, I'd be giving them various tasks that Devin seemed able to handle, and people were saying, "Oh my God, is this the end? Is this where things end?" And it turned out that they had cherry picked that demo. That Devin was actually not anywhere near as intelligent as people thought it was, and it had the tasks that they had given it were very, very specific tasks that they knew it would work well with, which is still impressive. That it could do those tasks, but it's not that general purpose thing that people are really looking to get out of AI.
How did you hear about that?
I think I heard it on Reddit. I have a number of random news sources for tech news. Reddit is a big one. I'm in a couple of subreddits for developers, senior developers, that sort of thing. Um, Google News is also one of my favorites because Google knows what kind of stuff I like, so I get a lot of this information. And AI stuff pops up a lot. And I try to encourage that because I think it's important to be paying attention to what's out there.
It's interesting. I'm on their website and they're hiring a machine learning researcher, a software engineer, a GTM engineer, a full stack design engineer, which is interesting. I've never heard that before, and then developer relations engineer. And what do you think about that? Like that lineup of who they're hiring?
I mean, that seems pretty normal for what they're trying to do. Yeah, there's design engineer. There's a couple of engineering jobs where they like to tack on just kind of random descriptions onto engineer, and then, oh, you're an engineer, it's gonna be focused on this, and like they're hoping to get like a specialist. Usually it's just someone who's an engineer that just happens to maybe do a little bit of work in the front end would be my guess. Like that's a front end focused engineer. The developer outreach is kind of interesting. That it's I think it's a position that's been around for a while. It's mostly come to my attention more recently, like in the last couple years, companies that are having those roles. And a lot of those are people who are saying, well, our customers are developers. And so if you think about it, it's a little bit like a marketing position, I think, where or marketing and sales, where they have to think of how do we build a product that our customers want, and how do we sell that product to them? But developers are special. in more than one way. And we're a little arrogant, and we're also pride ourselves on being intelligent and also a little counterculture. So if we feel like we're being sold to, a lot of times that actually will push us away. And so from my experience, the development outreach person is someone who either is a developer or has adjacent work, but kind of works more almost as an evangelist marketing person. And they know how to interact with other developers and just show them like this is what you want. This is the sort of stuff that this is why this is helpful to you. And kind of sell to them in a way that they want to be sold to. I mean, it's still just sales, right? But developers are just prickly about that stuff. So that's I may be wrong about that, but that's been my understanding. As far as the rest of that, it makes sense because Devin was never pretending to be a software engineering replacement. It was trying to be like a junior or a helper software engineer. And that means that their thing is you still need a senior engineer. You still need a senior engineer. You still need your mid-level engineers, staff level, stuff like that. It's just that maybe you can replace your juniors. Now, the thing that I see being really, really dangerous with that is where do they think the senior engineers come from? We don't just spring out of the ground fully formed as senior engineers with all our stuff. We spend a minimum of 4 years in the industry as junior engineers learning our stuff. And so if no one's hiring junior engineers anymore, there's not going to be senior engineers in another 5 or 6 years because we'll retire. Like under worst case scenario, I'm probably another 20 years away from retirement. And when that happens, who's going to replace me? Someone who is going through possibly, well, given the experience I have, someone who's going through college right now and just getting out of college. And if they don't have a junior position waiting for them, then they're never going to become a mid-level engineer. They're never going to become a senior engineer, and they're never going to be able to replace me. And so that's the thing that I'm concerned about is that a lot of people are taking this to think that they don't need junior engineers at all. Um, there's the rhetoric of we don't need engineers at all, which is ridiculous for a lot of reasons. But the we don't need junior engineers is much more believable, but I think honestly a little bit more insidious.
I could, my unmute didn't work. Why do you think senior or junior engineers are hated so much? And why so many people like that's their vision for the future? Like that's literally their vision.
Well, I think there's kind of two questions there, right? Why are junior engineers not desirable or hated? I don't know. I think hated is a bit of a strong word there. I would say like they're not as desirable engineers. And we've seen that trend for a while. It's been maybe about a decade since the whole there are not enough developers turned into there are not enough qualified developers, which is a much more interesting phrase. Um, I think a lot of it is because by and large, junior engineers are not very good. That's kind of by default. They've just gotten out of college, they've just gotten out of a boot camp. They don't really know what they're doing, and they know the basics. A lot of times they don't have a good foundation, depending on where they came from. And often or not, getting a junior on your team means that not only do you have to take a senior engineer and pair them with that junior engineer, which means that your senior engineer is now going to be less, they're going to be less productive. It's going to take probably 6 months for that junior engineer to get up to speed at a point where they're not a negative drain on the team. Now, the idea, of course, is if you put enough time into that junior engineer, they're going to become a positive on the team that's going to grow. And that is the thing that we can't get out of AI yet, is that if you take a decent junior engineer, you can turn them into a senior engineer in 4 years, whereas AI cannot do that yet. It's gotten to a certain level and that plateaus. So I think, yeah, people don't like junior engineers because they, at worst or at best, they're just a bit of a negative productivity drain on your team for a long time. Um, and then, after 2 years or so, when they've just gotten useful, they're going to want a promotion. They're going to want a raise because now they're not a junior engineer anymore. They should be a mid-level engineer in like 2 or 3 years. So now you have to pay them more and give them more responsibility, which they're going to fuck up all over again because that's what happens when you get a promotion. You start getting new tasks that you're not ready to take on. Or, if your manager's good, you've already been taking on those tasks, but that's a little rare. But that's why I think a lot of companies are like, well, let me get a senior engineer instead rather than a junior engineer because that senior engineer is going to be useful very rapidly. Especially like a super senior like myself in a code base that's mid-level, I can get up to speed in about a month, maybe 2 months. Larger code base will take a little bit longer, but we have more experience. We have the ability to really get up to speed a lot more quickly. Um, and I think a lot of these companies, especially startups, they're not thinking long term. They're thinking very short term. They're thinking 2 years down the road. They're thinking 6 months down the road. And hiring a junior engineer who's going to be a drain on your productivity for 6 months, if you're thinking 6 months down the road, that's just a bad investment all around. Why would you ever do that? Even 2 years down the road, it's maybe not great. If you look out longer to 4 or 5 years, it starts to become much better. But then the problem you get is a lot of engineers leave their jobs after 2 to 4 years. So then you put in a bunch of training into this junior engineer. They've given back, but probably you're still at a net loss. And then they leave and go to another company that pays them more and doesn't have to incur that negative cost because at that point they're already trained. Which is, I think, a failing of our schooling system in a lot of ways. Like we don't, engineers that come out of the schooling system are not ready for the real world. They have the they have the base concepts, but they don't really know the modern technologies or how to work on a team. People coming out of a boot camp know modern technologies and how to work on a team, but not base concepts. And so, yeah, it's just not a great situation there.
Something you said brought me to this concept that I learned about when I was, back in my college days was these two things. Um, and it's interesting because like the way Marx at the time understood market forces was that humans are more exploitable than machines because machines have a fixed like output, right? Is essentially what he said. Like it's very hard, or was at that time, very hard for machines to put out more than a human would. But a human, it was variable. And the wages also changed things. Whereas the machine, the cost was like fixed. I'm wondering from what you're talking about whether AI is sort of the opposite almost, right? Where the costs are, or maybe it's not even the cost, maybe it's like the output is like more predictable in the same way that a machine was, but like the costs are actually lower because, and I don't think Marx was like talking about this when he was talking about his framework, but like I'm wondering if the cost for AI engineers or just even software engineers in general, because you were saying, right, like junior engineers are really low and then senior engineers, it keeps increasing. And I'm wondering what the interaction is between that and like, you know, LLMs or just anything that's like AI related. Like whether that's what's incentivizing this whole thing and how it's like kind of flipped this model. And that's why it's led to, people investing so heavily into certain kinds of AI. And I read this post about like, we want AI to do our laundry and not make our art. We want to make art. And I've talked to artists too who don't agree with me about using AI art or using any generative AI for creative pursuits, which I also don't agree with because I think there's this notion that we humans are original and we don't copy from each other, which is not true. We do. And we absolutely copy from each other. I'm not the first person to record a video on Substack or whatever on Zoom, right? Like there's no originality. but the when the threat is from outside of a human, it's like even worse in their mind. Whereas amongst humans, we call it inspiration and whatever. So that's like another sort of piece that's like at play for someone like me who does make art and who does design and who also uses AI tools to do both of those things, and what that does to my value in the market, but also what it does for software engineers and how it relates back to Marx's original conception of how labor even works, right? Like the way that engineers are paid, I don't even know if that was like in his conception of ever being like a thing. Like it would be like petty bourgeois, like class essentially for software engineers. And what's also interesting is like when we talk about like the tech industry, and this is related. I looked it up. Like December 2024, the IT unemployment rate was 2%, the lowest it's been since November 2023. That's IT, right? Like we can't say that that's software engineering necessarily. October 24, the tech unemployment rate was 2.6, up slightly from September. That's still pretty low compared to, actually, yeah, what is the national? Um, national is 4.1, so it's half or like 40%, or 60% of it. So I'm wondering those. I know I went over like a lot of stuff right there, but just if you have any thoughts about like those theories, and I can talk about them more, or I'm sure you can like look it up also. But like, yeah, I'm just wondering like how you think the economics of the whole thing kind of works from your point of view.
I think that is really interesting. Like kind of the idea that a machine might produce, it's cheaper, obviously, right? But it's going to produce potentially more consistently. I don't know if that's entirely true for AI because what we've seen with AI is that it actually is not very consistent. It hallucinates all the time. It makes stuff up, and some AIs are better at that than others, right? But it is pretty cheap. Um, the amount of something you could ask the AI to do, and it kind of depends on what you're asking to do as well, but you could ask it, write me a 10,000 word essay in the style of William Shakespeare about butterflies. And it's going to do that. And it'll probably cost, I mean, the consumer would probably pay like maybe 30, 40 cents for that. And, the actual like resource cost might be a little higher, but if you actually were to have a human do that, it would take them a significantly longer amount of time. And if you were paying them by the hour, at least in like the US, you would probably end up paying them something more like $100 to write that because it's just going to take them longer. The thing is, it's not going to be that very, very good of an essay. Um, so I think also like back to
Wait,
when
which one's not going to be that good of an essay?
the AI one,
Why do you say that? Like, how can you say that so confidently?
because AI is not, and I'm trying to think of the word to use here. AI is not creative. Um, it can only regurgitate what it's already learned how to do. And you might say, well, isn't that human too? But no, we are able to very easily combine our previous experiences and things we've read, learned, etc., and turn it into new concepts. Maybe not entirely new to the world at large, but new to us. And so what that means is that if you ask a class of 30 students to write an essay about butterflies, you're gonna get some similar concepts, right? Because how many things can you say about butterflies? But they all are going to be fairly unique to those students. And this, as you become a bigger, better writer, that writing style becomes more distinct. Whereas an AI, if you tell it, write me an essay on butterflies, it's gonna pick a persona. So, like in that example I gave, write an essay on butterflies in the style of William Shakespeare. It'll do that, and it'll give you what Shakespeare probably would have said about butterflies, but that's Shakespeare. The AI itself cannot come up with something new. And you might say, well, William Shakespeare never wrote an essay on butterflies. Isn't that new? Yeah, technically, but it's not any different than if he had actually written an essay on butterflies, right? So it's the AI itself cannot create. And so that's why whatever it produces, this is kind of why we use it for junior software engineers. It's producing quality similar to that of someone who barely understands the systems they're working with, which is a junior software engineer. It's going to produce the same level. The problem is, though, it can't get better. So if I have a junior software engineer and they write some code and it's shitty code, and I tell them this is bad code and I explain to them why it's bad code, they will improve from that. And I can do that. I can just go up to saying, this is not great and this is why it's not great. And they can take that and add it to their knowledge of the system. The AI doesn't know what code is. It doesn't know what words are. It's just following it's autocomplete on steroids. So if you tell it this is wrong, all it knows is that it adjusts its weights a little bit so that it might give you a different answer next time. It doesn't know why that was wrong. It just knows what you wanted instead. And so you're never going to get the same kind of quality out of it past the base level. And
That's
so,
yeah, I oh, go ahead.
so say like talking about factory, there are, or up until recently, there was a car brand that still made all of their seats by hand. They actually had a leathersmith come in and work the leather and sew the leather manually and do all that stuff. And that person had been doing that for 40 years, had an apprentice who'd been doing it for 20 years. Those car seats were works of art. At that point, they were extremely high quality, well put together. Probably each one cost $10,000 by itself. Compare and contrast that with a car seat, even leather, made by a robot in an assembly line. It's going to be picture perfect, but it's not going to have that individual touch, that personalized thing that gives it that high quality. So mass manufactured stuff is never going to be the highest quality. And you might argue, well, perhaps software doesn't need to be mass manufactured, or it can be mass manufactured. And what I would say on that is if you get a seat in your car and the robot missed a stitch because of whatever reason, or something just went wrong with it, if it's a human doing that, they notice they missed a stitch, the robot's not going to notice. Not a big deal. Your seat's still there. It's just kind of crummy. Maybe, it falls apart a little bit sooner, but the car's still driving. In software, if things don't work 100%, they don't work. There's no 99% in software. If the code is not correct, the entire thing does not function. And so it's really important to get all the details correctly. And so you can't have something that is right most of the time. It just doesn't work. And so that's why mass manufacturing it doesn't really work that well with AI. People who have tried it have realized that pretty soon they need a software engineer to help them sort out the mess they made.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I thought I was going to share a quote that I thought Carl Jung said, but it's this guy named Gene Mouch right here. And but I can't also find like him. Anyway, so I don't know who said this book, but it basically says you can't lead anyone else further than you have gone yourself. And I think this is so true for like even self-help, right? But it's true for what we're doing with AI. Like until we fully understand what is even happening like within here, we're not going to be able to like recreate it. And that's why, like you said, it's regurgitated. And I hear this a lot is that it's a derivative, right? Of something like if you take a photo of something and then you make a drawing of the photo and then you make a drawing of that drawing, it's like a game of telephone and it just eventually turns into this like confusing hodgepodge that doesn't really make any sense and doesn't look like the original thing that it's supposed to represent. And I think that's kind of where we are with things around AI. And something like maybe we could touch on next time because we are almost at time is like you talked about like cheapness, right? And I read something about like the cost of running the servers and everything. And I'm just wondering like cheapness of what, right? Like is it cheapness of like salary? Is it like the cost of the environment, like time, like resources, just different things that we also want to take into account when we're talking about that because like I think that people are taking that into account, like people who are doing these kinds of things. But I just wanted to point that out. Like, how are we looking at the world? Like, I remember you and I had also talked about like different ways of setting up corporations or just like systems where people are paying like per the resource that's like or how much of the resource they're using. And just these different models, like looking at how we could set up like businesses or even like cities or just, societies, like my city builder. Anyway, but I just think like I think or city skyline, sorry. I just think like it's interesting to like wonder about these things and to understand that we don't understand, right? Our awareness globally is not at the same level. Like it's just not. Like everybody has different levels of awareness. And until we hit that own awareness of self and withinness, I don't know if we're going to be able to like unlock this with a computer because I think it's going to come in some hybrid form. Like it's going to have to be some sort of self-healing mixed with a computer situation of like a thing. And I don't know if they're working on that, and that would be really interesting to see. But yeah, I just want to bring that up that like you can't lead anyone else further than you have gone yourself. So I'm going to give you a chance to just like say a few words before we wrap up. Um, and for whoever's listening, if you are interested in this, please like, comment, share it. And then I'm going to hand off to Robert. So, Robert, if there's one resource that you would recommend to people, what would it be? And then if um, you could also share one message that you have to the world, um, that would be great. And then we can end out the episode. Wait, did I pause recording? Shit, I said, oh, I paused the screen share.
So yeah, I would say for one resource, I reckon that always recommend the computer file channel. They actually have done a lot of really good videos about AI, explaining how those models work, how neural nets work. That's just a really, really good channel. They do go into technical stuff, but they also have a lot of really pretty diagrams. So as long as you kind of understand some of the technicalities around it, then there's a lot of really interesting resources there. Um, and this is a YouTube channel. And as far as a message to the world, I would say kind of going back to something you mentioned a little earlier that I want a robot to do my laundry or AI to do my laundry, not make my art. It is easily possible. Even with technology before we had the latest version of LLMs, it was possible to make a robotic armatudes that would fold and wash your laundry. It just was not commercially viable. So maybe consider that. The things that you want AI to do are possible. It's just they were determined to not make enough money to be something that people wanted to bother with.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And I will see you around and everybody else who has been here through this conversation. Thank you so much. If you're interested in anything more around this topic or want to have Robert back to discuss these things or discuss other things, please let me know. If we shared anything that you don't agree with or you find offensive, please reach out. Please reach out. That I would love to talk about it. We can disagree and have conversations. It's actually sometimes fun when people like listen to each other. So consider that and yeah, I'll leave you all there. Thank you.